Hello and welcome back to El Pozo, the Primera RFEF show. I'm your host, Nick Belf, this evening, and I'm delighted to say, once again, I'm joined by Liam Bambridge. How are you, Liam? How was your weekend?
Yeah, not so bad. I think you got to see more of these playoff games than I did, didn't you? I'm usually the one who's a gentleman of leisure while you have various commitments to attend to, but I was a bit busier this weekend, and I think you probably slightly outwatched me for a change.
I did. I think I got 3 out of 4, but one of those 3 was watched like out the corner of my eye, sort of like channel hopping because, as I'm sure we'll get into, obviously the Ponfe Antequera game and the Real Murcia and Nastic Tarragona game were on at the same time, and I couldn't quite keep up with which one I wanted to watch, Liam. I don't know how about you felt on that one. I think we were trying to cover one each, but I think at one point we were like swapping over.
Absolutely, we started off. I was kind of cross because my first half was it was intriguing, but you got all the goals, and I was like, shall I switch? Shall I switch? And then things heated up in my game and slightly cooled off in yours, didn't it? So yeah, we tried our best. I don't know why they did that. I just can't understand it. Sometimes it's to do with the national teams games, isn't it? And sometimes it's to do with a big La Liga fixture. On this occasion, neither of those applied. Why one game couldn't have kicked off a couple of hours early, even allowing for the heat in Spain? I do not understand. They managed to do that on the Sunday, but not on the Saturday. But never mind. You did, as you say, manage to watch 3 games and a bit of another, didn't you? I think, which is more than I managed. So we look forward to talking about them as always.
We did, yes. And we got to watch extra time in tandem as well, because obviously that was quite interesting, the Ponfe game. But more on that ever so slightly later, because we are going to have a bit of a different look at things. Last week we looked at things in sort of chronological order and walked our way through the weekend and made sure to pick up all the points. Because we're obviously going to be looking towards 2 finals, Liam, we're going to dwell obviously on what has happened, but we're going to do it in a bit more of a things that mattered, I suppose, like controversial things that went down, maybe some interesting match highlights and facts, because I think it's fair to say on the balance of prospects, there were some games which were a bit more exciting than others this weekend, weren't they?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think we could probably rank them in order, couldn't we? Certainly in terms of controversy, there's only one place to start, isn't there?
Absolutely, yes. And I think we kind of signposted this controversy earlier in the week, especially pointing towards this crazy decision that they've allowed, the playoff semi-final for a place in Segunda to be played at the training ground of Real Sociedad B and Zubieta. And Liam, everything about this in terms of the fan experience, getting Merida fans into the game, where they were sat, what they were doing, how they were treated, and obviously what happened on the pitch as well. This was the box office for all the wrong reasons, wasn't it, this weekend?
Unfortunately, it was. We did mention, didn't we, last week that Merida fans were being charged €30 to watch this game. They got to the ground to find themselves without any cover from the sun. I know it's not always baking hot in the Basque Country in June, but still, there's no cover. If it rains, if it's really hot, then they've got no cover. They're literally sitting on stone steps for their €30. There are lumps of concrete lying around. They had to take their lids off, as is always the case in Spain. They take the lids off their bottles of water because otherwise it could be seen as an offensive weapon. You could have it full of water and, with the lid on, cause some damage by throwing at the keeper. But clearly, throwing a big rock at the keeper if you're unhappy was okay. That wasn't a problem. So absolutely ridiculous scenario, and really reflects very poorly for me on Real Sociedad as a club. What did you make of the game? Let's stop talking about the nonsense off the pitch. What about the game itself? What about the first half, for instance?
Well, we knew that Merida had to go here and get a result. More importantly, they needed to show a bit more fight than the first game, and I certainly felt in the first half that we spent a bit of time feeling each other out, so to speak. I think both sides were very nervous about making a mistake, Liam, if I'm not wrong in saying. Managing to draw excellent saves out of both keepers as well. But Merida were chancing it ever so slightly for me. They were closer to taking the lead. And it was when it was Biesha? Is that how we're saying that player's name? Or Bieta?
I think it's Beitia. I don't know. I'm not an expert on Basque names. One of the Real Sociedad defenders, isn't he? I think he is a local lad. So I think it's Beitia, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I'm just about getting the Spanish, if I'm honest. Let's not pull back the curtain on the Basque pronunciations as well. Let's go with your recommendation there. Just managed to slice the ball over his own bar in that first off, which nearly gave Merida a glimmer of hope going into half time. The second half, a lot more goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, another good save from Juanpa then, Merida keeper to keep it goalless. And then this first big talking point for me, Beatty, we've just mentioned he got away with a slice over his own bar in the first half. In the second half, actually also in the first half, he grabbed a handful of Slava's shirt in the box, didn't he? Which is another one of these ones where how long do you hold on to their shirt for before it's deemed to be a foul? There seems to be some suggestion that you can hold on to it for a bit, but not too long. Clearly, they felt he hadn't held on to it for too long. They didn't see him holding on to his Slava's shirt. The second half, though, this challenge on Beltran, what did you make of that? Right on the edge of the box as Beltran's going through.
I don't see how it's not been given, especially with how close in proximity the referee was to it. And, I don't know if it's naivety or whether it's not wanting to court controversy. I can't see why he's not given that penalty. And I think, Beltran especially should feel very...
I'm talking about actually Beltran, the one before that. The one there is a challenge on Beltran right on the edge of the box. It's outside the box, but for me, it's a foul and it's a red card. Nick, he's through on goal, Beltran, in that situation, and I do not understand why he hasn't given a foul and a red card. That again, maybe that is about naivety. I don't know, but I couldn't see it any other way. I don't think Beatty gets any of the ball.
No,
it's not, Beltran goes to ground, and he's the last man. He's bearing down on goal. It's just extraordinary. So we haven't even got to the biggest talking point yet. We will get that, I promise. But
beg your pardon. Huge. Well, I think this was the reoccurring theme because again, to go back to the first leg as well, Beltran, it kind of came out after the game. We didn't really see it in it, but he was on the end of an absolutely massive shoulder barge, like an inconsistent amount of force being used, an unusual amount of force being used, an unnecessary amount of force being used to knock him off the ball in the first leg as well. He's clearly being targeted in this game as well, isn't he, Liam? And, you think on the balance of odds here that the referee would maybe notice that. Yes, you can get away with it once or twice, but after 3, 4, 5 times, you can clearly see that he's, on the end of a bit of a campaign here and a bit of a number from the Real Sociedad Bay players, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm not sure he's necessarily singled out for rough treatment, but the fact remains it's a foul for me. He's going through on goal. It's a red card. We did get a red card a little bit later. We first of all got a goal, didn't we, for Merida, which did make it obviously even overall, but because Real Sociedad they finished higher in the league, they knew that that losing 1-0 in this game after extra time would mean they still went through, as it eventually turned out. Another mistake by Beatty in the build was this: he slices the clearance. His Slava, who I thought was brilliant in both games, to be fair, he had a shot which was well saved. It ricocheted off him, and from a relatively tight angle, he squeezed in the opener. And then we had Mariez Corena sent off for a second yellow. So we've now got the away side 1-up, needing one more goal going into added time and playing against 10. And then we have the moment of all moments, which just beggars belief. Talk us through it, Nick.
Oh, well, as I was saying before, as I tried to jump and anticipate towards, he's obviously made his run into the box here. He's 1-on-1 with the defender and clearly beats his man and gets chopped, left-hand side of the box. It is a stonewall penalty, absolutely clear penalty. We've shared it on our social medias a couple of times. Obviously, Merida came out with a statement, a very humble statement, I must say, about this. So, I thought they could have been a lot more aggressive with their words. But this is absolutely clear-cut, as much as you can see it, a penalty, isn't it, Liam?
Totally. Absolute stonewall penalty. And I think what's interesting about this as well is that there's a few things to think about here. First of all, there was a discussion about introducing VAR for these playoff games. Now, over the games you've seen so far, probably there haven't been that many games which have featured really controversial issues, but certainly Merida in both games, I think, certainly any sort of VAR involvement would have encouraged the referee to look at challenges in the box on Merida players in both legs of this tie. Now, I think the thing that upsets me most about this, and it's what Sergi Guillot alluded to afterwards, it doesn't make any difference. The referee's not going to be able to go back and make the right decision again. But the arrogance that Guillot referred to in his post-match comments, the referee saying, "Get out of here, don't come and talk to me about it," he's made a real bad mistake there, and he's not prepared to own up to it. And I think that's one thing that winds coaches up all over the place. And I noticed that later on that evening, Guillot posted his thoughts again. He hadn't simmered down much either. And he cited Pachetto, who's a very respected coach. He's currently at Granada. He's just joined Granada in Segundo, who basically said, when I make a mistake, my actions are accountable. I pay for my mistakes. And these people can't even have the dignity to come out and say we made an error. And I think that, I know it doesn't solve the problem. It should have been a penalty, and Merida, wouldn't necessarily gain anything from an apology other than just a little bit of consolation that perhaps somebody admitted they made a mistake. But there's not even a willingness to do that. And in a situation like this, I just think that's appalling. It's the very least that match officials should be prepared to do, but it doesn't happen, does it?
No, it doesn't. And again, just echoing back to that statement that Merida made, it wasn't about jumping up and down, stamping the feet and having a tantrum. They made some very legitimate points, because let's not forget, and I'm taking the law of averages here, but when Malaga were relegated down to Primera RFEF, I think their funding loss was around 7 million euros. So, taking to place maybe a bit of inflation with maybe 8.5, 9 million euros. And that's not to say they won't get past Nastic to Tarragona either, but it's such a big, important thing that, yes, I'm not a massive fan of VAR, but it would be useful to have in these situations, especially if we've got the cameras there to look at it. But the refereeing standard needs to be at its highest quality as well, because there's so much on the line. Whether we like it or not, the difference between being in the Spanish Segunda and the Primera RFEF financially for a club can set you up for years, when really, in reality, some of these clubs are just about keeping afloat from year to year. That's why they only do 1-year deals. That's why they, sometimes have part-time players. It's a completely different ball game. And if you're a Merida fan or a part of the club in Extremadura, you're looking at that thinking, I'm unjustifiably out of pocket potentially here. You know what I mean? And I think it's worse as well, Liam, that obviously Real Sociedad, baby, and the filial of Real Sociedad, they don't need that money. Merida do. Merida do need that money to grow, to expand, and to achieve their dreams and things like that. So it leaves a very bad taste in my mouth, Liam. I don't know about you, but I think Merida would be more than justified to be a lot more upset about this. But I think they're handling it very, very well.
Yeah, I think so. And let's not forget, they have obviously recently been bought by Brentford, so maybe bright times around the corner for them. But right now, I'd be incredibly sore. And the fact that TV angle exists, whether it comes from the Merida coaching staff, whether they put a camera there or whatever, the camera angle exists that shows it is an absolute blatant penalty. You could argue the referee's the wrong side, although he's very near to it. He's the wrong side to see the contact from Raul Perez on Beltran. But there is a camera angle that shows it quite clearly. Now, if that camera angle is out there and can be put on social media, it's utterly unacceptable that the referee doesn't have access to that. As you say, with so much money at stake, and it wouldn't have to be Merida. It could be another side who don't have a Premier League club that's just bought them that could be losing out to this kind of decision. So it is really, really poor. It does leave a sour taste in the mouth. I know we're pretty anti-filialis anyway, so we're never going to be happy about this result. But it was twisting the knife even more, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we caveated the playoff shows with La Real Bea, the filial that I'm not too bad about. Oh, we hate them now, don't we, Lee? We really hate them now. And obviously, Merida will go and regroup, and obviously there's going to be some changes, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But they've still got a good progression to make, haven't they? They've still got potential to go again next season. They've got a great, solid foundation. Obviously, like you've already alluded to, they've got a bright future. So I'm sure Merida fans obviously be disappointed with this, but they've still got a lot to look forward to, which is good. Real Sociedad obviously know who they're going to be playing at this point in the final as well, because all they had to do was, as you've said, play for the draw on aggregate, knowing that, if they can do that, they go through on this finishing higher rule. So again, just to reiterate, the higher you finish in the league, the more of an advantage you get, because if it does finish the draw after 120 minutes of the second leg, you advance at the expense of your opponent who finished lower. So they knew that they're going to be playing the next club we're going to talk about. So we're going to flip down to the Nueva Condomina, Liam. That was a game that you watched in earnest on Saturday. A big one in front of 30,000 fans, and you know, it was the golden ticket, wasn't it? We made a bit of a joke about it with the Simpsons meme. It was the hottest ticket in town down in Murcia, wasn't it?
It certainly was, and these are, for me, I think probably the two biggest clubs in the playoffs, Real Murcia and Gimnastic de Tarragona. You'd expect there to be a decent turnout for this, but yeah, it was tremendous to see, you know, sold out in Estadio Enrique Roca, and yeah, it as a game, there wasn't an awful lot of goalmouth action, I have to say, but I did think that it was a really intriguing contest between these two sides, and we've just mentioned how badly the referee handled a couple of big key moments in the game between Real Sociedad and Merida. I thought the referee in this game, it's no coincidence, he comes from Zaragoza, obviously, a town that's dear to my heart. His name is Alfonso de Ena, and I thought he handled this game really, really well. The challenges were flying in. It felt quite like a sort of, you know, old school, you know, Merseyside derby or something to a certain extent. There was more skill involved, but there were a lot of challenges being made, a lot of protesting the referee, and he was really calm, really controlled, and I thought refereed the game really, really well. However, he didn't have a lot to do in either box, unlike the Real Sociedad Merida ref, because not a lot happened. But one thing when it did happen was absolutely incredible, wasn't it? To win through to a final with a goal like this, it's the stuff of dreams, isn't it? If you're a Nastic fan.
Oh, this is incredible. Let me just point you this way. If you are a coach of a young side or a Sunday side or a professional side, or if you are another Primera RFEF manager wanting to know how to you know, play through your opposition, this is the way to do it, isn't it, Liam? That play out from the back, the ball into Roberto Torres with that deft little back heel, and that cross for Pablo Fernandez and the finish. It was perfection from start to front, wasn't it? And you know, it was just. Would you say it was deserved? I was going to say this seemed like they were proper slogging each other, but it felt like a bit like a smash and grab to me as well.
I don't know. I mean, look, I can't really point to a single decent effort that Real Murcia had on target. It's certainly for those 20 minutes, I thought they came out of the box really sharply. I thought they bossed the game, you know, but they didn't have any show for that. And then after that, it could have gone either way. But then, you know, I think that's really the only effort that Nastic had on target either. After an hour of the game, and they didn't really need to look for much more after that, did they? They just protected their lead. And it is funny, isn't it? We looked at this game, you know, in the show last week, and we did say that Real Murcia were strong favourites, but wouldn't it be just typical Primera RFEF if Gimnastic de Tarragona, who've not been very good on the road this season, managed to eke out a win in this one, and then they went and did it, you know. So quite remarkable, really. I don't think it was smash and grab. No, I think it was one of those kind of, you know, if it were a boxing match, you know, a contest settled on points. It could have gone either way. I think probably Nastic just shaded it in terms of, you know, the control of the game, especially after they scored. They did look pretty comfortable, and incredibly frustrating for Real Murcia, you know, who are, as we can see, a massive club. Not sure what happens with Fran Fernandez from here on, their coach. He has got another year, but do they feel this is progress? I think so. They weren't in the playoffs last year, were they? So it is progress, but, you know, do they decide they want to give the job of not being in the playoffs next year, getting up automatically to somebody else? Let's not forget they're probably in the same group as Tenerife. So, you know, already that challenge is a big one to try and, you know, be the champions of Grupo Dos, because I think Tenerife will really go for it next year, and they've got a very good coach in Tevera in charge. So I don't know how it pan out, but yeah, it was, as a spectacle, it was compelling rather than, you know, thrilling. I think it's fair to say there weren't a lot of goalmouth incidents, but yeah, it was a wonderful goal to settle it. And yeah, so we now know that Gimnastic de Tarragona will play Real Sociedad B in the final, and one of those two sides will be in Segunda next year. And the first leg, of course, because Gimnastic finished in 5th place, will be in Tarragona this weekend.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe a word of advice from me, not that my advice is worth a lot, but you look at, for example, what Ceuta did last season. Obviously, they reached the playoffs with the manager that they have now, who I think, incidentally, was the former Real Murcia manager as well. So maybe they don't learn the lessons. But, you know, if you can keep the consistency and the manager's still got the drive and he wants to stay, I don't see why you wouldn't keep him. You know, they've got this far and they've got a good squad. It's just about building on for next season, isn't it? So, yeah, I think it'll be an interesting one to see whether he does stay. You might know about the Real Murcia ownership a bit more than me, but I don't know if they're too trigger happy with the managers, but we shall wait with bated breath and anticipation because, as we mentioned last week, the manager merry-go-round is in full swing. But yeah, that's the first semi-final, Liam, as you've just mentioned, absolutely decided in Tarragona next weekend. Nastic against Real Sociedad B. No prizes for who we're going to be supporting in that one. On to the next semi-final then, which was at El Torrelin. It was between Ponferradina and Antequera. Antequera going there with the slender lead, that 1-0 win at El Mauli the week before. However, it was quickly eradicated, Liam, in this match because Ponfe were out of the traps very, very quickly, weren't they? And I made a fantastic joke about them not being very polite on Twitter at the weekend, which I think my Spanish impressed you there. Obviously, I'm alluding to Cortez, the striker, who got a double in the first half. He looked absolutely brilliant, and Ponfe looked fantastic in the first half as well, Liam.
They did, although there is a clear error, isn't there? I think one of those awful moments for a keeper when he comes out of his goal and then realises he shouldn't come out of his goal. He's not stranded exactly, but he's certainly out of position, scuttling back into his goal, and probably wouldn't have saved it anyway. But it doesn't look great on him, does it? But yeah, they were brilliant, weren't they? For I did watch this game back the next day, and they were superb in that first half. But then, crucially, Antequera did manage to reduce the arrears, and then, of course, it was a rather more nervy second half, wasn't it? Although I think Ponferradina, although I think Antequera were very plucky throughout, I felt like Ponferradina were relatively in control of this game overall, didn't you? I couldn't see.
Yeah.
And they only took 1 minute. It took a second, doesn't it, for the whole perspective to change. But I thought Ponfe controlled the game pretty well in the second half. I think you said to me, didn't you? You were watching it live. You felt that Javi Rey perhaps said to them at halftime, just calm down. That's just like, let's manage this game rather than trying to score 5. And I think we certainly saw that in the second half, didn't we?
Yeah, I to be honest, I thought, going into the second half, obviously with Antequera scoring just before half time, and obviously we've spoke about that advantage that Ponfe would have finishing second over Antequera, who finished in 5th. But for me, Javier Rey, surely he's got to say, let's go kill this game off, because I don't fancy playing 120 minutes of football. Do you? But that's obviously what happened. And in the second half, it was a lot more managed, like you say, but there wasn't much appetite from Ponfe to go forward and grab a third. Whereas Antequera, the opposite, not without too much threat, but they were, piling forward at times. And I think I messaged you, didn't I, during the game and said, if this goes to extra time, the one fear I have for Antequera is that they would just run out of steam. And I think that's what they did. They managed to attack with intent, but there was just always that lack of I don't want to say effort. That's not the right word. Just that final ball just never seemed to land right. And I think it's because they were so knackered.
Yeah, I think so. I think the hearts were still pumping hard, weren't they, in extra time? But I just felt their heads had gone a little bit, not in a psychological way, just more. They were just exhausted, weren't they? The speed of thought and everything wasn't quite there. They were overhitting their passes and stuff. There was just that same desire that they'd shown, I think, very much, especially from when they got back to 2-1. And over the 2 legs, huge credit to them as a squad. We said before, they're a small club. I know Ponferradina, not exactly a Real Murcia, are they? But, Antequera have no real pedigree of competing at this level to get into professional football. And Ponfe, of course, have got plenty of experience of playing in Segunda, let alone the playoffs that they contested last year in Primera RFEF. So they were underdogs in this tie, of course, Antequera, and I thought they gave it a really good shot and came up just short. So no fault attached to their effort or to their commitment to the cause. And we did mention to me last week that there was talk about their coach potentially leaving right in the middle of this set of playoff games, which must have been quite disruptive. But they stuck to their task and they just eventually came up just a little bit short, didn't they? And I think that overall Ponfe were deserving winners.
Yeah, I think, like you say, on the balance of probabilities in that game, they did come out on top and probably do deserve it. And they'll probably take confidence in that because obviously they've got a very tough game in the semi-final. Obviously, that is from the game between Ibiza and Andorra. And Andorra made it a clean sweep for Grupo Uno. We've spoken a lot about how Grupo Dos looks like it could be the dominant league, really, and there's some bigger teams in there that we've alluded to, but the facts the 2 finals being played are between the 4 sides that finished in the playoffs in Grupo Uno, and not much to say about this Ibiza Andorra game, if I'm being perfectly honest with you, Liam. I texted you at the time, didn't I, and said, this is quite boring, which was surprising because I thought that Ibiza would try and get up for this one. There was a lot more people in attendance at the Camises than there were usually. The DJ was out, so, you know, the weather was nice. You'd think Paco Gemes and his side would be up for turning this deficit around, but they just couldn't get anywhere near Andorra. And it's not because Andorra were great. They just didn't look up for it, did they?
No, I mean, I suppose Bebe's missed penalty. I call it missed penalty. It is a fine save by Ratti, isn't it? Low to his right, but Bebe would expect to score from the penalty spot, 80% chance and all that of converting a penalty. You should, if you're Bebe, be able to strike the ball cleanly enough that even if the keeper goes the right way, he's not going to save it. He does hit a good ball, doesn't he, Bebe? And that just seems to deflate them completely, didn't it, really? It was a bit drab, you're right. Again, I watched most of this game when I could a bit later on. And yeah, disappointing you say that we'd said before, and Paco Gemes has alluded to it before, you know, there's not a lot of people who are diehard Ibiza fans. Lots of people seem to prepare to spend their spare time doing other stuff. So it was a shame when they did get a decent turnout that it was all a bit of a damp squib. And as I say, after that penalty, I couldn't see any way back. And then, of course, Lautaro de Leon, who's been in fantastic form recently, scored, and that essentially put the tie to bed, didn't it? It was all over after that. Obviously, Andorra with a 3-0 lead. It never looked likely that Ibiza would score the 3 goals they needed to use that advantage that they had of having finished higher in the league. So Andorra progressed, and they will start their final at home against Ponfe, of course, because Ponfe finished second and Andorra didn't. So they will get the home advantage, Ponfe, in the second leg.
They will, and a special note on Ratti as well, because I think he was really the key element for this, because it's probably harsh for me to say that Ibiza didn't do anything this game, because he did have quite a few decent chances on the break. Andorra played, you know, a quite a high line, which I think is usual for Beto Company's side, and more and more times, he just seemed to make the right move. He knew when to come out and make himself big. He knew when to put pressure on the attacker, and he was quite impressive in this guy. I think he did get keeper of the weekend above some of the other ones that were in contention as well. So again, his influence at the back there was really important for Andorra. And I think they'll look at this as a 3-0 aggregate, and they'll go up against Ponfe, who obviously they've finished behind this season. But I think they'll be confident, Andorra. I think there is an outside chance of Beto Company's side maybe getting the better of them, especially at home, Liam, because we're going to talk about these ties now. So let's talk about that one first. Ponfe and Andorra, how are you feeling about it? It's quite a good game, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with these two finals, isn't it, is that ultimately the vast majority of people want Ponferradina and Nastic Tarragona to get promoted. There's not love out there, is there, for Real Sociedad or Andorra, and I'm sure those two sides could not care less about that. They are both good sides. They may have finished lower down the league, Andorra than Ponfe, but yeah, they came into this end of season segment playing really well, didn't they? They've really, I'm not saying they've been unbelievable, but let's not forget, as we've said before, they were fairly close with a couple of weeks to go to actually getting right into the thick of the battle for the automatic promotion, weren't they? They were not far off it at all until that defeat at home to Sestao River Club. So yeah, they've not been in a bad place for the last 10, 12 games. And Ponfe, yeah, I think this is a really tough one to call. I think Andorra might well win the home game, and then will be able to go, having gone to Ibiza, 2 weekends previously, and protected the lead. Well, they'll feel pretty confident they can do it again in Castilla y León, won't they? So we'll see what happens with that one. I would make Ponfe still slight favourites, but I think Andorra have got a very live chance in that one. What about Real? Or do you agree with that? You said you think Andorra have got a decent chance in that. But what about Real Sociedad B against Gimnástica Tarragona again? First leg in Tarragona, as we say. How do you see that one panning out?
Well,
I wonder how the Nastic fans will feel about their unroofed. I mean, they'll take more than Melody, won't they, for a start? So I mean, that will pose an interesting problem. Do you think they might possibly try and move it into the main stadium, or?
I really hope they do. But I don't know what the state of Vanuatu is at the minute, but whether they're taking the grass up or something. But you've got to think, you've got to give the you've got to give the competition the respect it deserves. At the end of the day, if Real Sociedad B do get promoted, they're going to be playing in that stadium next season anyway. So why wouldn't you just, try and give them a bit of an advantage? It didn't look to me like they had an advantage playing at Zubieta, and I think all the criticism that they've had for doing that will be quite interesting. However, I do hope Nastic de Tarragona absolutely run roughshod over them and get this job done in the first leg. A 5-0 in the first leg would be absolutely spectacular for me. And that's coming from, like I say, I'm a Malaga
How you
fan.
have changed your colours, Mr.
I might changed my tune. And it's the. I don't want to say it's lesser two evils actually, because as much as out there, Nastic do have a reputation. I've actually quite enjoyed how they've acted in these playoffs so far. In terms of the fans, especially the fan experience has been there for me, and some of the stuff they've been up to. That blessing of the club, cleansing the spiritualness of it before the game against Real Murcia at the weekend. Just chef's kiss. It was perfect, and I just think for the integrity of the Spanish Segunda as well. It's been brilliant this season without any B teams in it. These teams, which I think there is a bit of a movement, Liam. I don't know if you're sensing this on social media as well, but there are a few people that are starting to utter the word saying, why are they there? What is the point? And I think, if we can just show that we don't need them and they'd be better off in their own league and developing elsewhere, then even better. So, yeah, hopefully Nastic get this one done.
Yeah, I think that movement's been there for a long time. I think there's a lot, you're just shouting into the void. That's the problem. I think there's been an anti-filial movement from most supporters in Spanish football, apart from the people that really matter, unfortunately, who don't seem to be at all minded to change the way things are set up, which is a great shame. But maybe someday it will happen. In the meantime, as you say, let's all be Nastic de Tarragona fans for the next 2 weekends. And yeah, you're right. I mean, I think the thing is, I feel like the whole business with their court case against Malaga was nonsense, and I don't think that did them any favors in terms of PR. I do think the sort of throwing the balls onto the pitch during that game against Malaga again doesn't reflect very well. But this is a minority. I mean, we can point to any fan base and find a few idiots, can't we? As you know, Malaga have a few idiots, Real Zaragoza have a few idiots, teams that we support. If you look at the wider picture of Nastic de Tarragona fans with whom we've interacted, both when I was there in the stadium early on this season and, through our social media channels, they seem like a really decent bunch now. Yeah. Maybe that's us being naive, but, that's our reading of it. And certainly when they go head to head with a filial who we don't want to win anyway, then that's just going to ramp up a bit more, isn't it? They seem a team that's deserving of getting back into Segunda. And so, yeah, we'll definitely be rooting for them these next 2 weekends.
Yeah, as much as we'd like to keep you Nastic fans, because you have been brilliant, we recognise as well that be a fantastic addition to the Spanish Segunda as well. So I'm firmly in that corner of this one. I'm in Ponfe's corner as well. I did text Chris Pigeon pre-game. We were sharing a few messages and he shared a few pictures that friends of his were sharing with us as well. So thank you for that. And I did say, out of the two for Ponfe and Antequera, I was very much in Ponfe's corner for that one as well. Nothing against Antequera, and I appreciate them, Malaga-based club and, small, nice minnow type thing. But there are just some teams that I would just like to see back in the Spanish Segunda in terms of that competitiveness, because what you don't want is these teams going up and just coming straight back down again, do we? We want teams that are going to go up there and compete, because not only is that good for that league, but it also shows the quality that was within the Primera RFEF league as well, which is getting better and better and better. So yes, that's what I hope happens in the coming 2 weeks, because we've only got 2 weeks of the season left, Liam. It's very exciting.
Indeed, it is. Yes, as I say, I think most people will be rooting for both Ponferradina and Nastic de Tarragona, and we'll see how see where that gets us. Hopefully somewhere. But yeah, so we will finish with some. We did some coach and player renovations, departures, transfer news for players last week, didn't we? So we'll finish on that, shall we, this week with a little bit more news. Do we kick off with what's going on down in Algeciras, or what went on in Algeciras in the last few days?
Yes, definitely. The Algeciras manager, Fran Justo, as they've parted ways, is the nice way it's been put. It's been a mutual agreement, but the man from Orense has decided that his time on the south coast is up. Do you think he might be going home, Liam, or are we reading a bit too much into that?
It's really interesting what's going on up in Galicia, isn't it? Because we've got obviously Pablo Lopez left Orense and was thought to be going to Racing Club de Ferrol, but they haven't announced that. Why would Pablo Lopez leave if he were not lined up for another job? He's had a decent season with the lads,
announced it, Liam. I'd have to double check that. I'm sure they have announced it.
Right, okay. If that's the case, because that was the other thing I thought with Fran Justo, could he be going to Racing Club de Ferrol? So I'm not sure where that's up there, but certainly, Fran Justo has traditionally worked in that part of the country. I'm fairly sure he had a second job for a little while at one stage. It didn't work out well, but yeah, he has coached right up in the north, and that's where he comes from. So you'd think he'd be looking to try and get back up to the northwest to be good. And another coach we mentioned before, didn't we? I think last week that possibly the new coach, the new season at Sabadell would start with a different coach. The coach there, Movilla, might not be staying on. And we've already seen, of course, the coach at Pontevedra, Iglesias, step away from that one. And now we've got the Arenas de Getxo coach also leaving, haven't we? Ibai Gomez, former Athletic Club player, has decided his future lies elsewhere. And I find this interesting because these are all quite well thought of coaches. Obviously, a couple of them quite young, up-and-coming coaches. I feel like they must be going somewhere concrete, otherwise they wouldn't leave. But I'm not sure where that is.
No, it's a strange one for Ibai Gomez. Again, I don't know where he could be looking, if I'm being perfectly honest, because there obviously was the links with Castellón and Huesca, but the owner of Castellón has come out and said no. I think they're keeping Johan Platt by the sound of things. And as far as the Huesca job is concerned, it looks like Sergio Guillo is nailed on for that one. It's obviously the Merida manager. So again, I don't know if that's going to be a bit of a move around. The Ibai Gomez one, Liam, I think I've got my finger on where he might end up, and I don't think we're going to like it. I think he might be going to Bilbao Athletic.
Yeah, that would not be a completely incomprehensible shout, would he? With his career at Athletic Club, he done so well there, and we obviously saw this with the potential for Javi Medina, didn't we? The Antequera coach to go to Betis Deportivo, and we hate this, but of course, if you've got a really long career or long relationship with that club, then you probably do hope that someday you might be the first team coach. And where do you start if you want to do that? You're not going to be parachuted right into the top. You're going to have to start in the lower levels, aren't you? Improve your worth. And Ibai Gomez, yeah, that would be something that you could see him certainly signing up for. Good to see that Imanol Soto is staying for Baracaldo, isn't it? That's, I think, his 4th season he's going to be there.
Yeah.
That's brilliant, isn't it? I mean, a coach who's obviously taken them up into Primera RFEF, and they had a decent, solid season, their first season at that level. So good to see him staying on for another year there. But unfortunately, he's lost his best player, hasn't he? I think we always knew that was going to happen. But Pablo Santiago has moved on, hasn't he?
Yes, he's headed to Castellón, who, again, I think this is a great advert for Primera RFEF to see that, clubs of Castellón's nature and a few other ones that have managed to pick up, players from our level over the last couple of seasons. It means you don't have to recycle the army of mercenaries which seem to plague La Liga and La Liga 2, because sometimes you get players turning up at clubs who are just there to push a pay packet, aren't they? Whereas at least with someone like Pablo Santiago, we know he's a good player. We know he wants to develop, and he's probably gone to a fantastic place to do that in Castellón, because they do like to work in that way. One player who is coming the opposite way, though, Liam, your favourite, the left back from Eldense, he's decided he's not going to stay in Primera RFEF. Interesting that he's decided to stay in Primera RFEF, though, because he's gone to Tenerife. Marc Machu.
I would say it's a really interesting one, this one, because I do think, I was talking about this with Alex Fitzpatrick, who obviously co-hosts the Segunda Spanish show with me, and our feeling is, I know he thinks I slightly overrate Marc Mateo, because I've often described him as the best corner taker of the league. He does take a great corner. But yeah, even he said, you know what, I think he could probably play Segunda still. He's nearly 30, he's 35 next week, so he's no spring chicken. But, he probably could, I think, get a Segunda contract. But he's gone to Tenerife, and I mentioned earlier on, didn't I, that they represent a significant, obstacle to any team trying to get promoted from Grupo Dos, if they go into Grupo Dos, as long as that's the way it ends up, if they don't go to Grupo Uno. Wherever they end up, they're going to be a real force, I think, with Tavera in charge. And this is the kind of signing, somebody who, for me, is still Segunda quality. They're getting him on board. That's a real statement of intent for me. And I think it bodes very well for Tenerife fans who've had a pretty miserable 12 months.
No, it really does. I don't know about you, Lima. I'm very invested right now where REF are going to draw that line, whether it's going to be north, south, east, and west. Looking at the map, we've got so many pockets of clubs, haven't we? They're not evenly spread out as they sometimes are. We've got a high number of Galician clubs this season. We've got so many down in sort of like the southwest of Andalusia, and everywhere else is sort of like in between. My bet it's going to be a west and east. That's where I'm seeing that. And dare I say, Tenerife might be flying to Madrid more often than we think, I reckon. That's my bet, because obviously that's what they do down in Segunda Ref, isn't it? I think they might look at that and say, well, that might be easier for everybody to do that to get to Tenerife. But yeah, it'll be very, very interesting at how they do split up that league. Another big issue which they've been talking about today, Ref have been discussing Europa and Arenas de Guecho. Their artificial pitches are very much at the forefront of their minds at the moment. Apparently, a decision has been made. They're just not going to say that decision just yet. But do you think, knowing what we saw at the at Zubieta this weekend, Liam, that maybe they're coming round to the idea that actually an artificial pitch isn't the worst thing in the world? There are probably other improvements that could be made elsewhere. It's a weird subject, isn't it?
It's a very weird one because, I mean, the pictures I've seen of Arenas de Guecho, it's not on the same level as Europa, for instance. And neither club, I would say, are, completely doing a brilliant job in terms of, what we'd hope to see a Primera F ground look like. But we are talking about semi-professional football, aren't we? I think the big problem here, as we've said numerous times before, is it's not fair on the teams that have coughed up the cash to make their pitches. They've dug up their artificial pitches and paid large sums of money to make their pitches natural turf. Is somebody going to basically reimburse them for that if they change the rules? I'd like to think they would, but I very much doubt they will. So it's a really difficult one. And this, we often do look at what's going on out there, don't we, in terms of what the general feeling is. And outside of those two clubs, everything you see on social media from other fans is like, tough. You knew the rules. You knew what you could end up signing up for to do if you got promoted. You can't now start whinging about the fact that it doesn't suit you to lay a grass pitch, or you can't afford it, or there's a car park underneath your ground and you can't, etc., etc. And I have to say, Nick, although I have a lot of time for Europa as a club, I don't know much about Arenas de Guecho, and I do think that this rule is a bit silly. I do think it's a bit wrong of them to talk about changing it now just because a couple of clubs kick up a real stink, because they haven't allowed that to happen before. So why should they allow it now?
Yeah, it's an interesting one for me, because it's a head over heart story, certainly in my book. And I would look at that and say, I would love to see Europa, playing in Gracia, playing in the barrios and doing that. And there is not a lot of grass pitches available in Barcelona at all, really. Maybe if is Mondjukic coming free soon? If Barcelona moving back to the Spotify Camp Nou, could be the only alternative. But they want to stay in their home, and I completely understand that. But I also get the idea that other clubs have had to abide by the rule. They've had to put themselves out of pocket. But I can't look past this Zubieta issue, this Betis Deportivo issue, this Sevilla Atletico issue, where we've got these filiales playing in the leagues. And some of them have got nice setups, don't get me wrong. But ultimately, it comes down to this. They are playing at training grounds. So you would rather them play at training grounds than play at the actual stadiums over a bit of plastic grass. It's a bit of I don't know. I see something needing to change. Yes, definitely. But maybe well, I suppose what I'm looking for, the compromise is they get that longer grace period, because I think Getcho could probably do theirs quite quickly. It's more of a financing for them. I think Europa have the finance issue, but it's that underground parking drainage issue, which will probably require a redevelopment of New Sardinia sooner rather than later as well. So many permutations, isn't there?
Yeah, we'll see what happens. If they've made the decision, I suspect, as you say, we might hopefully find out it quite soon. They have to start drawing up the leagues, don't they? Because presumably, if they're going to deny these teams a place in Primera F because they haven't got the means to get a grass pitch laid by the start of next season, they're going to have to promote another couple of teams instead, aren't they? So they are going to have to make their minds up quite quickly on this. I know Spanish bureaucracy doesn't tend to work that quickly, but they are going to have to make a fairly quick decision on this to make sure that the leagues can be drawn up and they can start thinking about, they've already some of the fixtures are starting, haven't they? I think the Segunda RF doesn't start for the 7th of September, but the Primera RF starts on the 31st of August. So they're already looking at only 2.5 months to get all this sorted. So yeah, we hope for a speedy resolution and a bit of common sense would be good as well, wouldn't it? But I'm like you, I'm very torn on what the best way forward is in this situation.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll keep everybody up to date either on this podcast or across our social medias as well. So keep your eyes out for there too. Obviously, we always ask you, Liam, on the Spanish Segunda show. It's been a very exciting weekend of playoff semi-final football. Obviously, second leg's coming up this weekend. Where do we need to pitch ourselves on this one? Which game should we watch out for two?
Well, we don't have to wait to the weekend even, actually. You might even have missed it, depending on when you listen to the show, because the two second legs are on Wednesday and Thursday this week. So, yeah, they are going to be played midweek, and then we'll be into the final. And it looks like Real Oviedo are going to knock out Almeria, which would be a bit of a shock in some ways, but I suppose they finish out the league, so not such a shock. And then Racing Santander Milanés, we shall see. 3-3 after the first leg, absolutely tremendous game. If you can find a way to watch that on Thursday evening, I recommend that you do.
Yes, definitely. That sounds good. I didn't know it was midweek, to be fair. So I now have plans for midweek, which is quite good. But yes, obviously we've got our first playoff finals coming up this weekend. We'll be back again next week just to double check and make sure what's going on is that we're okay with it, Liam. And we might be absolutely elated with the results. We might be in despair with the results. Who knows? But yes, we'll be back again next week. I'll say thank you to you, Liam, for joining me once again. Gracias to the listeners at home. We are in the last straights of the Primera RFEF season, and thank you for joining us on this journey. So we'll see you again very, very soon.
Hasta la próxima.